listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling. Here is your host, Thomas Allen.
I think host is a bold term, but I'm happy you're here. Thanks for listening into another In-Fisherman Storyline podcast. We are coming to you live from our palatial studios, and live is a lie, but they're palatial here in Brainerd, Minnesota at the In-Fisherman headquarters. And we're actually under a severe thunderstorm warning. You might hear rain tapping on the skylight. And you know what? That's Mother Nature. We need it. It's been dry around here and finally getting some much needed rain. Problem is, I think we've deleted the drought with the amount of moisture we've gotten, and so now we're just flooding basements. But that's the way it goes. This is a special edition of In-Fisherman Storyline. In fact, this is a hard copy edition. We've created several buckets of this podcast where we talk about the life of being a guide when we're on the road. We talk about In-Fisherman television. We're going to dig into some historical stories here at In-Fisherman, but this one in particular, we're going to talk about magazines, and we're actually going to we're going to briefly talk about In-Fisherman specifically, but we're going to dig into one of our favorite sideline projects. A lot of magazines have we'll call them SIPs underneath our umbrella, but really it's an annual magazine that is dedicated to kayak fishing. And so we're going to bring in some cool people here, some guys that have contributed an exorbitant amount of time. But the one thing that we all have in common is not only do we have a passion for fishing, we share a passion for kayak fishing, but we also understand where the industry is moving, where we're seeing the most amount of growth. And over the past few years, the kayak fishing space has been one of the most rapid growing components of the fishing market. And it's been hard to keep up with. In fact, it seems like almost electronics, where day to day you're getting new boats, you're getting new components, you're getting new add-ons, you're getting new electronics. And how does that fit onto a kayak? Why buy a kayak? So this magazine is called Kayak Fishing Fun. And we have some characters here tonight, and I'm going to go through this list. This is very important. We have all of the contributors. All right, and starting at the top is the CEO of All Things Outdoor Sportsman's Group, Mr. Michael Carney. He is deeply involved in all of the aspects of what goes on at Outdoor Sportsman Group, and that list is very long. We can talk about that at some point, but he is also the publisher of Kayak Fishing Fun. I kind of feel like this is a pet project for Mr. Carney. He's passionate about fishing. He loves kayak fishing. He loves the ability to sit in a comfortable web seat on a small plastic boat, cast a lure, and just have a great time fishing. It's a recharge for him. And we're going to bring him in just a second, but next to him is going to be the executive editor of All Things Florida Sportsman. Now, that's a magazine, if you're in Minnesota, you may never have heard of, but it's actually a very robust publication down south in the state of Florida. And he spends a great deal of his time managing the editorial for that magazine. And Jeff is also the editor of Kayak Fishing Fun. I report to Jeff. I report to Mike. And so we've got a few of my bosses on this line. In fact, we're going to bring in the third boss here of mine, and that is he's a 20-year veteran at In-Fisherman here, the managing editor, the site supervisor of all things In-Fisherman, Dr. Robert Newman, and he has spent a great deal of time helping me get kayak content placed in the pages of In-Fisherman magazine. He's very in tune with the trends of fishing, and I'm sure he'll agree that in Fisherman, in the fishing space, kayaks are rapidly growing. So we got three bigwigs here, folks. We appreciate all of you guys making the time for this. Thanks for being here. Let's start with Mr. Carney. This was your brainchild almost 4 years ago, I think, over 4 years ago. Tell me about the inception of Kayak Fishing Fun magazine.
So the inception was we make our annual pilgrimage to the ICAST show, and there were a growing number of kayak manufacturers, accessory companies, trailers, etc., etc. I found it fascinating. I was always a small boat guy when I could get away with it on the waters that I fished growing up on Lake Erie. That wasn't often, but there are times of the year when we would get out there anyway. We've been coming to ICAST for a number of years, and we were seeing the category growing. So I figured the community was experiencing, great growth. But when you actually chatted to a lot of the manufacturers, they were saying it's tough. Like we need a jolt. We need a shot in the arm. There's not as much sales as we would hope. And I always understood the beauty and wonder of kayak fishing. I think, the combination of you're getting some great exercise, it's incredible accessibility to some places you can't get with conventional boats. They're easy to launch and use on your own. When I lived and worked at In-Fisherman, I probably passed, a dozen fishable lakes on my way home from work, and I only live 15 minutes from work. So they're a wonderful application for parts of the country like that. And I think that everybody should have one, whether you own a conventional boat or not. It's just a fantastic way to fish, and it's super intimate, and it's what I enjoy most anyway. After chatting with our partners at the ICAST show over how things were going, they said, look, we need some new people involved in the sport. And I said, we can help that across our 3 national television networks, Outdoor Channel, Sportsman's Channel, World Fishing Network, our stable of 15 magazines, 4 of which are fishing-centric: In-Fisherman, Florida Sportsman, Fly Fisherman, and Game and Fish, plus our 20-some websites, and I think we're a little over 80 social media outlets that we manage. I knew that we could bring to consumers a bunch of information on how much kayaks have grown, progressed, adopted, offer new features, offer new accessibility, the hybridization of the models between pedal models, paddle models, powered models. There is literally something for everyone now. And Thomas, you're well aware, we're fishing 2 years ago, and we got motioned over by game wardens to come to the shore, which I assume they wanted to see if I had my non-resident fishing license. He goes, no, I trust you. I just want to see your kayak and how you rigged it.
Well, hold on. There's a part of that story we need to explain, is that they also found something of yours on the road. Then by chance, this never should have happened. We had launched the kayaks, the game wardens motioned us over, talked about the kayaks, and then what happened?
They called us. There's 2 things I always bring in a kayak for sure, in addition to my safety items, Jeff Weakley. I always bring a thermos of coffee and cigars, and it's probably in that order of importance. Anyways, I was lamenting the fact that I'd somehow lost my coffee, my thermos, on the way to the ramp. And unbelievably, Jeff, these 2 game wardens were driving down the road and said, is that a thermos? And picked up my thermos and had my thermos for me when I got to shore. So, and I'll bet a silver dollar that you put that in the holder of your kayak, the cup holder, the roto-molded holder for your kayak, thinking ahead, I need to make sure that I have my coffee in a kayak, which everybody agrees coffee is a priority in the morning. But I'll bet a silver dollar that's what you were thinking. You were thinking ahead. You didn't want to not have it, and it ended up on the road. I don't remember you saying you didn't have it. It was a surprise when you came back. They found my coffee cup. Yeah, when you were launching on the other part of that ramp, and I was going down the unimproved portion, if you remember, launching on a dirt hill, and that's when I noticed. I thought, well, it just fell out here on the hill, but it didn't. It was gone. It was completely gone. And I get about 3 miles to a cup of black coffee. So that's my fuel. So well,
that's living right. I can think of it. There are numbers of items I have lost on the road traveling to and from a fishing location, and I don't think I've ever recovered anything. If a rod flew out or a rod sock or my dad told me that gone. I've lost a tackle box that belonged to my dad, and he still brings it up today. He's like, yeah, you left that on the road somewhere between Des Moines and Muscatine. I'm like, you're right. But it was an interesting situation, but I've had the same thing happen. I've actually been on the water at my in-laws cabin, this is a long story we don't have time to get into, that Mike actually spent some time on a long time ago while he was beginning his time here at In-Fisherman. That's a side story. Mike actually managed this facility for a long time and has worked his way up. So he's very familiar with In-Fisherman. He's got a soft spot in his heart for In-Fisherman. Otherwise, I think I'd have been fired. Rob might have been fired. We're grateful that you're here because you've spent some time here. But
Rob wouldn't have been fired, Thomas.
So they actually brought you your thermos down to the water. That redefines the motto to serve and protect. The serve part for sure.
Yeah, I think initially, Rob, it was going to be used as like bait, right? Like, hey, we found this thermos. Do you know who it belongs to? Nice. But I voluntarily pedaled over there.
Well, the connection I was going to make to Eagle Lake is that I was pulled over also. I thought I had everything in line, or so I thought. And the game warden said the same thing. He's like, tell me about these kayaks. They're rigged. They've got electronics. They've got, all the creature comforts that a kayak, in my mind, needs to have. And he asked me a whole bunch of questions. He saw we had the registration sticker, saw that we had life jackets, and he was happy to let us go, no questions asked. But I mean, there is a growing trend, and I think that Jeff could probably speak to this. I feel like it's been a south to north trend where maybe the 365 a year angler is more inclined or more likely to hop in a kayak. You've got where Jeff is located in Florida, you've got salt and fresh water that's fairly accessible. And we can talk about this down, here in a little bit, but in Minnesota, especially where we live in central Minnesota, the kayak phase hasn't really caught on. But the different shops we've been in Mississippi, I love that place. God, I forget the name. Everything Kayak. Is that right, Jeff? Everything Kayak.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, there's been a trend. You've been seeing it for some time, but talk a little bit about what you're seeing where you live. Is there is there a combination of freshwater and saltwater anglers that go both places, or are they kind of exclusive? And does that kayak kind of stay on one type of water?
Yeah, I think most of the guys in Florida are they're fishing all different kinds of waters. I mean, one of the great things about Florida, of course, is you've got coastline. You got two oceans essentially, and no place in Florida is more than an hour and a half away from saltwater. At the same time, the Florida Peninsula and the Panhandle they're riddled with beautiful streams and lakes and marshes. And one of the great things about the kayak is, as you mentioned, it's easy just to throw it in the back of the truck, throw it on the trailer, and you're in the water quick. So, for me, where I live on the East Coast, I mean, I might spend one day on the Indy River Lagoon fishing for snook and reds, and the next day I might be back on a lake going for bass. And we use a lot of the same tackle too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the thing that has interested me is we're in some of the finest fishing country across North America. Minnesota is just amazing for the exceptional water, the lakes, and I feel like this is a perfect place for kayaks. And Florida, you're right. There's so many of those small, inaccessible areas that you can get on and have a great time. But Minnesota seems ripe for the picking. But I feel like the trend has been progressive, right? You see an abundance of interest along the coastlines. There's a lot of interest in bass country, especially. There's a lot of bass fishing tournaments that are kayak based. And so bass being one of the prominent species people are pursuing, that kind of drives the focus. Now, Minnesota, you could say, if people are going to travel to visit Minnesota, Rob, let's talk about this for a second. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple species people are coming up here after traditionally, and that might be muskies. It's definitely walleyes. There's the northern pike, smallmouth bass, maybe to a point traditionally, but as recent events have occurred, we've kind of dropped off of the I guess walleye muskie map, and we've become a bass centric state to an extent. But why do you think, based on what you've seen through the years of publishing In-Fisherman magazine, that kayaks are just kind of in the last couple of years taken hold here in the upper Midwest?
Well, it could be what you said. People are discovering that this area, particularly around our headquarters here in Baxter and In-Fisherman, people down south come up here and they find it. It's like a bass fishing wonderland. I mean, it's largemouths and smallmouths. Smallmouths world class for sure, lakes, rivers, whatever it might be. But some of the slow to take off might be due to perhaps the methods that people do fish for walleyes, for example. It's intuitively doesn't seem like perhaps it might be a good method for a kayak, but it's very adaptable to a kayak.
It is.
And it's not necessary. And as we learn more about catching walleyes, we learn more about the differences in the versatility in the ways we can catch them, where they are location wise. For example, they're not always on deep mid lake humps or deep points. We've long taught here, and Doug has been a great teacher of this in terms of just fishing walleyes in vegetation up close to shore and weed edges, weed lines, humps with vegetation on them. So all that stuff is very accessible. And I think the more people learn about how to access these species, whether it's bass, crappies, muskies, catfish, another great example.
Yep.
It's sure to have a positive effect on those trends.
Well, I said it was progressive, and I think that's the case. I feel like it's starting to catch on here in Minnesota, and it's going to become more popular as time goes on. But really, it might be just because there's not an overabundance of literature or content to have at their fingertips. And I think this is where Kayak Fishing Fun has really broke into the mainstream here in Minnesota and the upper Midwest. And I think that's really what Mike's early vision was when we first tackled this project to create this awesome magazine, was to present kayak fishing to people that may not be aware that it's there. And the progression of Kayak Fishing Fun has been, hey, there are boats that fit your style of fishing. There are locations where you can go and catch fish. There are accessories you can add. Here's a long list. And we could spend hours talking about the evolution of Kayak Fishing Fun, the magazine. And maybe that's something we tackle down the road, but really we want to provide a resource for people to understand, hey, you can build some confidence, learning from our readership, learning from our contributors, finding YouTube channels, finding information in In-Fisherman magazine. We've actually added a kayak fishing section there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cool stuff coming. And Mike, I want you to, I know we could talk for hours about KFF edition 1 through KFF edition 4, but maybe give us a brief rundown of the evolution of those 4 magazines and bring us to present. So if people are going to go pick up the magazine on the newsstand at their local distributor, or they're going to buy it at our website link, which you're going to tell us about here in a second, what can they find in these magazines?
Everything and anything that you need to know relative to kayak fishing. Jeff is a very humble editor-in-chief. He actually wrote the book on kayak fishing. Jeff, how old is this publication?
Look at that.
10 years ago?
It's got probably
like
12. At this point.
Jam-packed information. And this was like what I would say, it was just like the beginning, the start of understanding what you could do in a kayak, right? Like, this really was, for me, the genesis of getting started, right? And this is a 12-year-old product. And the boats that we have today compared to some of those earlier versions, they were great craft, like, did all sorts of neat things. But today's boats are so much more advanced and ready to equip, ready to rig the exact way that you want them, whether that's you're going to be doing marsh fishing and sight casting for redfish, specks, or flounder, or you want to go out in the Great Lakes and have a big 14-foot boat with, I caught more walleyes last year on Lake Erie out of a kayak than I did a conventional boat, only because I could launch that kayak every night by myself. I didn't have to rely on anybody else. So watching that evolution, Thomas, of the boats, especially of the accessories, the powering options, the power to run the different things we like to use, everything in your case from forward-facing sonar to downscan, and in some cases, multiple motors on the same boat. That's not my cup of tea, but it is like I'm somewhere in the middle, and Jeff would be, I would say, far left of all of us, like the most simplistic rigging that Jeff likes. Like, truth be told, he takes a lightweight canoe and be able to swing out over the marsh grass and choked areas that get all that vegetation in Florida, and that's his idea of a great time. So I forget your original question. Yeah.
Well, we'll get back to that, but I think you hit the nail on the head. The beautiful part about kayak fishing is it is what you want it to be. And there's no wrong way to rig it. There's no wrong way to use it. If you're out there fishing with a kayak straight out of the box with just the rod holders that are built in, have at it. More power to you. That's what you want. If you want to rig it to the hilt, maybe as you would a bass boat to compete in kayak tournaments, you can do it that way. So there really isn't a wrong way to do it. And I think that having a resource like Kayak Fishing Fun is important for people to get a hold of. And that was the original question, Mike, is this magazine's cool. We're proud of it. We're going to go through some pages here in a little bit. But before we do that, and we'll mention this towards the end of the show, talk a little bit about where they can find this publication.
So you can go, probably the easiest place, although we're distributed nationally on newsstands, it's only a 60-day window because it's an annual premium magazine. It's almost book-like in its texture and thickness. It's only available in a 60-day window in the spring when people are making purchase decisions, most people, on either a new kayak, power options, electronics, rigging. So we put it out on newsstand that time of year, but the absolute best place to get it would be to go to outdoorsbest.com or osgnewsstand.com and go to our SIP section, and that's where you can find it year round. And plus, you don't have to go to newsstand to try and hunt it down and find out what retailer. OSG Newsstand is where you can get it, purchase it, have it shipped right to the house, and bang, you have the whole complete compendium. Plus, you can buy years past. I think one of those issues is sold out, but we have at least 3 of the 4 years available, and all that information is as relevant today as it was 2-3 years ago when we originally published these. But it was meant to be a guide, Thomas, right? And to get people familiar, comfortable, understanding. I mean, there are some things to learn if you want to rig your boat and take maximum advantage of all the things that you can do with it. You can make it as simple as you want. We have a section on choosing the right rig for the waters you fish most and why. Everything from inflatable lightweight kayaks to 14-foot Super Duty, super stable Great Lakes type rigs. So it was meant to be a resource guide for all new people getting into kayak fishing to understand how to choose a hull for the waters you fish most, how to accessorize it for the fishing that you like to do, and then just be a curiosity of different things that maybe you haven't thought of, a book of discovery on things that you can do to boats that a lot of people never imagined that you could rig a kayak that extensively, like some of the outfits you're putting together.
Well, I think that we had a vision of creating a blueprint, and I feel like this is almost like a series of books. Yes, they're magazines, and maybe you don't look at this like a David Baldacci book, right, where you buy this one and read that. You got to go through the whole series. I think this was created to be that way. And Jeff, talk a little bit about your vision when Mike came to you and said, hey, we want you to tackle this. You've got experience. You understand this. I am super proud of these magazines. I mean, I've got all 4 issues in front of me. They're heavy duty. I would consider them almost collector level coffee table type magazines that you're going to leave out for your family to pick up. You want to, if you're going to take one to the barber shop, you're going to kind of leave it on the table so someone else can read it. But Jeff, tell me about your vision and how you tackled this and why it was so important to bring kayak building techniques, fishing techniques, and understanding the system. Talk about your vision there, because your vision is in hard copy, and that's why it's so great.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, Mike pretty much hit on the main themes that we cover, and you know, obviously it's gear heavy, it's boat heavy, it's accessory heavy, it's about what's new. You know, we do cover, you know, a lot of the biggest thing I've really seen since I'm with the optimal angle, so it's a comfortable and intuitive place to put that rod. And so to me, it's exciting to look at those trends and look at the ways in which, you know, some of these major manufacturers have incorporated, you know, common sense stuff or some of the real high-end DIY garage stuff that we used to do 15 or 20 years ago. A lot of that stuff it's built into the product now. And there's accessory manufacturers. They've got all kinds of cool tools. I mean, there's trailers, there's different kinds of tracks, there's different kinds of storage boxes, accessory mounts for transducers, pretty much anything you could dream of, anything that you might envision yourself doing on a power boat, you can do very easily on a kayak.
I think that's the beauty of it, though.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sorry, Thomas. I just wanted to say, like, going back 12 years ago, Jeff, to that start, would you ever imagine that today molded into the hulls are a 4-hole pattern? So whether you want to add a power pole, an accessory motor, multiple power poles or accessory motors off the back, now you have the mounting plates and 4-hole pattern molded into the back of the boat. I mean, you never saw that years ago, right? Frog eyes for routing cables into the interior for pedal steering, for example. All the little nuances that are available now. Sorry, Thomas.
Go ahead, Jeff. That was, I mean, right on.
Well, so I would say that's probably 60% of the magazine is sort of consumed with that. You know, it's the revelatory aspects of what's out there, what can you do with this? But then the other part of it is, you know, as an editor, you know, I'm firmly rooted here in Florida and our traditions here, but I'm passionately interested in what else is going on in different parts of the country. So, you know, it was really important for us to build a stable, if you will, of some contributing writers, and to lean on some expertise of some guys in different parts of the country, guys and ladies, men and women, kayakers from different places. So you'll find, you know, some heavy hitter bylines in these magazines, you know, guys like Jason Broach, Bailey Egbrett. We've got, you know, some of the Ed Stout, Brian Nelly, you know, a major prize winning bass fisherman who's a pioneer in the blue water fisheries in Florida. You know, we put these writers together to contribute their expertise and share what they've learned. And it's been fun for me to see sort of how that comes together with each issue.
In your state, sorry, Thomas, your state was a natural evolutionary place for that to happen, right? But just because of the variety of fisheries there, from, you know, various interior lake and river options to all the coastal applications. So that makes sense that evolution would begin there, Jeff, or that revolution in kayaks that has been exported, to your earlier point, Thomas, making it all the way up to where you're at right now, for instance.
Well, there's been I would say a transition more to affordability. And I think that we would all agree that boats across the board have continued to get more expensive. They have a purpose. And I think that those that want to afford and can afford a boat are going to spend that money. But you definitely kind of saw kayaks start off relatively affordably, and they've gotten more expensive as the years have gone on. But I think the value, you're spending some money on a kayak, but the value is you don't have to pay for maintenance and storage, and You don't need to build a whole shop to accommodate the boat. You can hang this from your ceiling. Insurance is a whole nother thing. You mentioned earlier, Mike, you're able to launch it by yourself. There's all kinds of accessories, a very long list of accessories that make launching and landing your boat a piece of cake, anchoring, etc. So I think that the option to have something that's individual, that's unique to you, that is gives you independence. And one of the things I've noticed, we could all probably go back to our own genesis story of fishing and the passion that we have for the outdoors and what inspired us, and then taking what inspired us and applying it, right? I don't think that if you're never able to apply what you learn, you're not able to grow and develop as an angler. And for me, my son broke free from me to be his own dog in a kayak. And I watched him from the shoreline of this small lake in Birmingham, Alabama, pedal across. He was using a Old Town Predator with the PDL drive. And I watched him. I stood on the shoreline and watched him for 45 minutes, maybe because I was nervous, but maybe because I wanted to see how he adapted to that kayak. And here's what he did. He paddled up to a brush pile and reversed himself away from it because he was coming in too hot. He figured that out. He made a cast. And I'm telling you, the first cast he made at that brush pile, he caught a fish by himself. And it wasn't a big fish. It wasn't a memory, I think, for him that's going to stand out the rest of his life. Maybe it will, but the point is he made all the decisions by himself, was able to control the boat no matter the wind, and that taught him independence. That moment in a kayak taught him how to make decisions. So I think that what it offers, you mentioned this earlier, Mike, this is a term that I completely associate with kayak fishing, is it's an intimate fishing experience. You're by yourself, you're in control of a small boat. A small puff of wind might force you to react, right? So you're kind of off course a little bit. So you've got to think ahead. You've got to make good decisions. And I really believe that fishing from a kayak is going to make you a better angler in the long run, because you've got a lot of things going on at once that you can control, but if you don't control, you're going to be out of position. So I'm a big believer in what it offers a developing angler. And Rob, the question for you, we've covered a lot of developments in In-Fisherman magazine. I mean, for a very long time, going on 50 years, we have taught anglers how to fish. And when I say we, I mean you, because I've only been a part of this for a short term, but In-Fisherman taught me how to fish. You've seen the trend develop, you've seen it grow, and we've started integrating that into the magazine. We do a special kayak section each year. Talk about the trends of education with anglers within the fishing space and how that applies to kayak fishing.
Yeah, well, anything that we teach relative to freshwater fishing is going to apply, whether you're fishing from a 18-foot multi-species boat with a 250 horsepower motor on it or a kayak. The fundamentals are always going to be the same, whether you're walleye fishing, bass
or from
fishing,
shore,
it is, or from shore, right, Mike? And our magazine has always been about multi-species fishing. So we always cover bass, walleyes, pike, muskies, panfish, and the kayak fishing stuff fits in so well because all of those species are opportunities that are available fishing from a kayak. So it's we have been incorporating now regular kayak sections into the magazine, I think since 2021, but we've covered kayak fishing before that. And when we think about, okay, what are the 2 or 3 articles we're going to do in this special issue that we can do 2 or 3 features, it's always a lot of fun to try to figure out what topics do we want to cover, because it's sky's the limit in terms of the species or the methods. It could either be about hardcore rigging of a kayak with electronics. You wrote about that in the last issue. That taught people, and some people are hesitant, like, wow, I can really actually cut a hole in my kayak, and
really cut a hole in your kayak.
It's very it's something when you come home with a brand new boat you may not want to do, but when you read it and you have good content that teaches you how to do it, it sure brings a level of comfort and confidence into being able to do something like that.
I think that's in Fisherman's mantra, is creating confidence.
Yeah. And so we may have technical articles like that, that when we may have an article that's more of a storytelling thing about, what is the joy of kayak fishing? or it may be something, pick a species. We've covered small boats for giant fish for a variety of species, whether it be sturgeon, catfish, big blue cats, just these fun things you can think about and explore with a kayak. Could be crappie fishing. We've covered panfish, all kinds of things. So it's when we set up those articles, we oftentimes think of it as sort of complementing the Kayak Fishing Fun SIP, adding to it, but also thinking about what the readers of In-Fisherman would like to see too. So whether you're an avid kayak angler who's been doing it for a long time, or just a novice kayak angler who's starting out, there's going to be something there for you.
Well, and we spoke about trends, and Jeff, I want you to talk a little bit about how Florida Sportsman, and the magazine that you've worked so closely with for a long part of your career, what are your visions, or how do you interpret the trends of kayak fishing? And I guess most of all, can you take a kayak, the same boat, put it in saltwater one day and put it in freshwater the next? Are they built to handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. In some cases we'll take kayaks, in boats, in power boats. That's something that we do in Florida. Mothership these kayaks out to remote islands and places that are, might be difficult to get to under paddle power. But when you get there under, motorized power, you find that some of the flats or mangroves might be inaccessible. So the kayak could bridge a functional gap in terms of finding places that you might want to catch fish. And as we all know, the harder it is to get to a place, the more likely you're going to find willing fish. So I think there's a lot of that goes on.
So I know you wrote that book what did Mike say, 12-ish years ago? When you first saw kayaks come onto the scene, do you feel like, I think a saltwater application was first, or was it just built out of necessity to not have to store a boat? What do you think was the initial turn towards kayak fishing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably, I don't want to speak for other states or for like a fishery in general, but I would say probably canoes were maybe one of the earlier manifestations of what we do nowadays. And canoes, were in wide usage on rivers and small ponds, going back into the early 20th century. It was always something you do. It's summer camp experience. You'd go rent a canoe livery on a river. And so in Florida, we did a lot of fishing out of canoes, and canoes have some pros and cons. One con is obviously if a canoe gets a bunch of water in it, it's full of water, and you're done until you can flip that baby over and start over. A sit on top kayak, you're impervious to the whims of the water. If a wave breaks on a sit on top kayak, the water just washes over and you keep going. So there was definitely some improvements in terms of hull design and what we can do once the rotomolded kayaks came online, kind of in the early mid 1990s when this sort of started to take off. Was it freshwater? Was it saltwater? For me, it was saltwater. The kayak for me was an easy way to launch in the surf and fish parts of the beach that are distant from inlets. So I could be the first one to get on fish early in the morning, and I'd spend nothing on gas. I'd spend a lot less time getting to and from those places. So the kayak that I fished in when I began writing that book that we're referencing was a little Malibu Mini X. It was a little 9.5-foot kayak that would fit in the back of a Suburban. I could close the tailgate on it and go wherever I wanted to go. And I launched that little boat in the surf here in Jensen Beach and caught, you name it, kingfish, snook, bonitas, big jacks. It was a whole lot of fun. And for me, it was just a ticket to a kind of fishing that I enjoyed. And it was an easier, faster way to get there than by powerboat.
This is interesting. So we're not too far, 4 hours anyways, from the Boundary Waters here in Minnesota. And that is a nationally, probably a world-renowned destination for a canoe experience. And if you take that part of North America and that part of the United States and transfer that all the way down to Florida, the common thing there has been a canoe. And so maybe the canoe was the entrance into performance. Like, we want to get people into a boat that they can control a little better. Frankly, I'm not super into canoes. It hurts my back. It's a lot of work. I don't like to paddle anything. Mike will tell you if I don't have two trolling motors, I'm not on there. So I think that like the propulsion, and I'm using this pun intentionally, the propulsion into performance kayaks with a pedal drive system or a motor system really captured my interest, because listen, I want a big motor, right? I want a four-wheeler to ride up the mountain. I'm not going to walk up a mountain. I want to have fun. So comfort became something important. I think that's really what catapulted kayaks into fishing, was the option to have that seat, was the option to have that motor or that pedal drive. And you know, Mike, let's talk a little bit about accessories. I think that we could dig into this for hours on end, but you know, your opinion of what needs to be on a kayak is different from Jeff's, and is different from mine, and is different from Rob's. And so talk a little bit about two accessories you will not get into a kayak without. And that same question is going to go across the board here, so you guys can get prepped. But go ahead, Mike, you're first.
Oh, that's a tough one. As I stated earlier, Jeff's probably at the one extreme of that equation, with you being at the other, and I probably find myself in the middle. Like, one of the things I most enjoy about kayak fishing is the physical nature of it. Like that's a part, like bow hunting. I like that it's a little more challenging. That's part of the reward for me, at least on waters that it's practical. If I'm on the Niagara River, like I want to make sure at least I have a pedal craft available to me, and ideally power. So, you know, depending on the fishery, I think that question could change, Thomas. Like I would tell you, I think obviously rod holders, just from a convenience standpoint, are really important. I would probably say I could get by with 5. Maybe 5 would be a better starting point. So I'd have a crate or tackle bag of some sort, rod holders, and this is beyond safety gear. So Jeff,
yes.
Obviously a PFD, a whistle, all the things required by Coast Guard. Like, I'm assuming we're meeting those standards already. Now we're getting on to
yep.
like the niceties that make the trip more comfortable.
The creature comforts and amenities. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So a tackle crate or tackle bag, rod holders. I have to have some kind of electronics, even if it's just, you know, a standard sonar unit to check depth. You can get various applications on your cell phone to look at contour lines and whatnot. But I think it's really important to have a piece of electronics for the waters I fish. If I fished in a marsh, like, that wouldn't be something I need. Obviously, I think a net is pretty important. That's a key component. So what are we at, 4?
Something along that line. But don't stop. Keep going. This is good stuff. You're allowed to have more than 2.
Fish grips, pliers, all the standard, things that you need to have, like, at the ready. And unlike Jeff, like, I got into it hardcore, let's say 6-ish years ago. And like every year was a learning experience of, oh, darn, I really could use that, right? I really could use this. I really could, like kayak cushions. I would have never thought, 5 years ago, that I would ever rely on a kayak cushion, or there's some inflatable options available now too. But for a 6-hour day, 8-hour day on the water, those are pretty darn handy. And then just the human creature comforts, a thermos, whether that's coffee or a drink. You got to stay hydrated and all that good stuff. Because like Jeff, like when I go, I like to go far. I like to get away from everything. And I would probably, my other creature comfort would be a couple 3 cigars and a torch lighter, and I'm good.
Well, and that probably brings in the value of a cup holder, because well, Mike has done this. I wouldn't be surprised if Yak Attack comes out with a custom cup holder that they're gonna call the Carney cigar, ashtray. But that totally makes sense. You want to enjoy yourself. You want the creature comforts. You want the satisfaction of a cold Gatorade or a hot coffee in the morning, or a cigar. But you're right, and Mike, you cleanly illustrated that you don't like to go over the top, which I do. I'll go last year. That's fine. And the beauty is we can do what we want. But Jeff, I'm interested to ask Jeff this question, because if you had, now let's take safety components out. So a PFD, a paddle, you should always have a paddle, whether you've got a pedal drive, a motor drive, or a paddle boat. Obviously you need to keep that handy just in case. So the essentials are off the list. Jeff, what are the top 2 or 7, if you want to take Carney's route, your top essential items you're going to have in a kayak at all times?
Red grapefruit.
I'm not surprised by that at all.
I didn't see that coming.
Well, honestly, have something that you enjoy eating, that you can take a break and slice up a grapefruit and enjoy it. Something that's sweet. It's got some hydration in there. It's a sort of a dense, good food. Doesn't require refrigeration.
Does that fight cramps? Because I've had trouble with cramps.
Yeah. It's it's a universal.
Mostly,
it's a panacea for all the kayaker.
That's right.
Mostly he's getting hand cramps and turning that motor, Jeff. Like it's exhaustive at end of a day of musky fishing.
Well, I take pickles, because I know pickles will solve cramps.
Yeah. Well, there's something to that, whether it's grapefruit or oranges or energy bars or whatever. Take something to eat, something that you like, that's a special treat. The other thing I like to take, and maybe this falls back into that safety gear, but I like to take something that's visible, whether it's the shirt I'm wearing, or a bright colored hat, or a safety flag. Yeah. Where the places where we fish in Florida, you really need to make yourself visible to other boaters on the water. Whether you're lost and someone's looking for you, or you're just trying to get across the channel, it pays to make yourself visible. And I see the kind of trend, toward these, gunmetal and desert tan and camo. I mean, there's a lot of things out there, and there's reasons why we might want camo, say if we're going duck hunting, but for just general time on a kayak fishing, I like to be visible. So something that's got some color.
I like the grapefruit idea. Do you take do you bust it open on your knee, whop, or do you take a little knife, like maybe your bait knife? So you want to make sure your bait knife is cleaned off before you slice open your grapefruit.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into the realm of promoting something, but I've got one of these new MagnaCut blades that's totally impervious to salt water. It holds an edge, and it's really a joy to cut with. So that's kind of like a little magic moment for me, is to pull out that special blade and take apart that grapefruit on the water.
Well, our friends at Yak Attack, this is actually a brilliant idea. They developed a cutting board that fits on top of their boy, here we go. I'm going to forget some names here, but the track pack system that sits on the rails, such a cool idea. So if you're catfishing, you can cut your cut bait on something that you can wash off, or if you're going to take a grapefruit kayak fishing, which I think is fantastic. I mean, whatever makes you happy, that's how you go kayak fishing. So
especially if you cut it on your cut bait board.
Well,
that's going to taste.
That's right. You got little shad guts on there. That's right. Some people put salt on their grapefruit, but so the question rolls to you, Rob. I know that you enjoy kayak fishing. You and your family that you do it together. You spend time doing it. So talk about a couple of amenities you're going to have every time you go.
Well, this is the hard part, to be in third place on this one, because they already addressed a lot of the great things to have. If I could add maybe 2 more, I didn't hear maybe something about just a good waterproof box, a small box to put your phone in, your wallet, your keys, something secure.
Or a dry bag.
A nice dry bag. Yeah. It's it just gives you the confidence that if something happens, the important stuff's going to be dry. And then an oddball that I would throw out is I like to go out on the river, catfish, and do that kind of thing. So I'm oftentimes hunkered along the bank, fishing wood piles, whatever it might be, a brush clip that acts as an anchor. So just a piece of tether with a little like a clamp. You can clamp right to something and hold yourself right there.
You've motivated me to find that article, because I actually think I wrote that. It was either last year, Mike, or the year before. We talked about anchoring devices.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of really, really good stuff that I found, and a small gator clip, almost like vice grips, will attach to a tree limb or something like that. And,
like a charging cable.
That's right. That's right. Well, but here's the cool
They
thing.
Actually, sorry, Tom. They actually make, so Mariner Sales carries them, and it is essentially like a vice grip looking instrument. I have one in the garage if anybody's interested in seeing it. But Rob, that's one of the things that, goes clipped on to the box, so I always know where it is, right? So my backpack, I have it sitting on there and can just peel it off and, grab some brush or shoreline vegetation or pull up to a wood pile and be able to hold the boat steady. Like that's an often very overlooked, but man, when you have it, can be a real trip saver, a real convenience saver.
It sure is. And I had a perfect transition going here until I got interrupted, but we're going to let that fly. Thomas. No problem. No problem at all. It's not criticism, but I was going to say, in my time using fishing out of bass boats, walleye boats, I think one of the most important innovations to come along have been the shallow water anchors. And that has been, I mean, if nothing else, and this is just going to indicate my laziness here, but if nothing else, being able to power pull down or talon down or raptor down at the dock is so handy. You don't got to dig a rope out. You don't worry about your boat getting dock rash. But the value of being able to hold still, and there's a couple components that I will say on my kayaks especially that I find it irreplaceable. I started out with a single power pole. The Power Pole Micro is a fantastic lithium battery driven shallow water anchor that works on a kayak. And as anglers have gotten more intense about their bass fishing applications, shallow water fishing applications, they started putting 2 of these on their kayaks. And it really does. There's a difference between 2 and 1 of these things. You can imagine if you put one pole down, the front of your boat, whether it's a 21-foot bass boat or a 12-foot kayak, is going to swing one way or the other. So if you put 2 down, it minimizes that movement. Now, you can deal with it. 1 certainly suffices. And in the perfect scenario, you'll be just fine. But I added 2 Power Pole Micros to one of my kayaks this year. And I know I'm going to get made fun of, but I love the application of just sticking the poles down and we're holding steady. And so what that allows me to do is if I do encounter a situation where I've got a group of fish on, and we're talking bass fishing specifically here, I can pull down in a grass mat where there's 4, 5, or 6 fish surfacing. There's a bunch of bluegill, and you can fan cast that area and thoroughly fish that area. So it does add a little bit of security. It does kind of hold things together. So I would say some type of anchor. And if you're in a river like Rob was talking about, where you have that grippy plier thing that will clamp onto a tree, there are anchor trolleys you can get that will drop an actual anchor. You've got the shallow water anchor system like the Power Pole Micro. And there's actually just a spike that you can stick through a front or rear scupper hole on your kayak. And that will work in some situations. So you don't have to go full Monty and put 2 power poles on there. You just got to have something to kind of stick into the substrate. So a shallow water anchor would be one of mine. And then I love electronics. I really enjoy being able to see water temperature, to see bottom type, to side imaging and down scan and all the different types of technology. I like having those amenities on the side of the boat. But this year I added forward facing sonar to my kayak, and it was a bit of extra work, but in the long run, it gives you a whole nother perspective that you're able to include in the puzzle, right? The puzzle of catching fish and determining the pattern. So those are 2 things I would add. And I think we would all agree that tackle storage is a top contender and a necessity. And even in Jeff's case, if he's taken and I promise you, Jeff will catch more fish than me 9 times out of 10. I've fished with the man. He's very capable, and he'll take the bare minimum. So maybe there's a point to kind of pulling back a little bit on how much you take. But if you're going to fish a kayak bass tournament, You're going to want to take 6, 7 trays. You're going to want to take 6, 7, 8 rods. You're going to want to make sure that you're maximized to the hilt to be able to perform. But don't think you can't be successful without that, because as Mike said at the very beginning of this, you build your kayak to accommodate your style of fishing, and there's no wrong way to do it. So I want people to take that from this conversation, that kayak fishing it's you. It's about your style of fishing. It's about your personality. But we want Kayak Fishing Fun to be a guide, to be a blueprint, to encourage you to create a level of confidence, to drill a hole in your boat, or to not take anything with you when you go fishing, and understand that maybe the success is a result of you launching the kayak or being where you need to be. And by the way, item number 3 would be a cart. There are a lot of carts out there, and when you have your boat loaded down like I do, you got to be able to get it to the water's edge. So we're going to wrap this up here in a few minutes, but I want us to go through this magazine, and I want us to talk about some of these topics that were covered. Jeff, let's start with you. I know we're all proud of this magazine. I can't overemphasize how great it turned out. But talk a little bit about what's in these pages. Talk about a portion of this magazine that when you went through it, it was like you got done, you're real proud of it. What are your favorite 2 or 3 articles in here?
Well, I mean, for me, the Yactic section, where we kind of distill fundamental skills for different fisheries around the country, I really found that interesting to put together. You know, Thomas, you had a great story in there about how to install forward-facing sonar. And while it's not a system that I'm likely to use in the fisheries that I typically encounter, I'm fascinated with how you can take that kind of technology and adapt it to a kayak. So I really enjoyed reading about how that stuff is put together. We had a gentleman from out west, Eric, who wrote about 8 great baits for fish in Western waters. You know, those deep reservoirs out there, that's a fishery that's totally alien to me. I'm not liable to spend much time out there, but I'm still interested to hear how they fish that deep, clear water for hard pressured fish, and the evolution of different techniques that they use, because I might find elements of that could help me out here. You know, for instance, snapper fishing out in 40 or 50 feet of water. You know, I might use a drop shot rig with a little scented plastic and try a technique like that. So I'm always happy to learn about different things. And I mentioned earlier, Brian Nelly, who's a friend of mine, he's got a good introduction to sail fishing, you know, how to catch one of the greatest game fish in all of salt waters. And he talks about it. People do it here in Florida. And so for me, it was fun to kind of put some of these minds together and, you know, look at some of the different methods that people use to tackle fish in different parts of the country.
Mike, we'll send it over to you. Talk about, I think, and I know that you're probably not going to mention what you wrote, but I will say your state of the industry feature, or how you talked about what's going on within the kayaking business, was very, very intriguing. But what are your top 2 articles in this magazine, or 3 or 4, however many you want to talk about?
All right. Well, before we get to that, I want to follow up on Rob's. So I do practice what I preach. These are holds tight. I think I got this at Mariner.
Yes.
In fact, I know I got that. And you just pull up to the brush, you put this on, and
that's awesome.
It holds you there. Anyway, and to your point, Thomas, the anchor stakes and other really affordable options of anchoring. I love my power pole. Not everybody can afford that. So there are other very affordable options, whether you put an anchor trolley on your boat, whether you use a stakeout pole if you're fishing shallow, or something as simple as holds tight. So for me, what I would say is, it's not just a magazine, right? When we started this media initiative, a magazine was going to be the foundation. But Jeff, we probably have 40 plus videos on kayakfishingfun.com now, running the gamut from powering boats to how to pick a hull to the differences in human propulsion options and options in powered boats. Like, it runs the gamut. So it really is a multi media effort, and that's not to mention the social media that we've done, the digital articles that are on the website. So it is a magazine at its foundation, but we are publishing year-round information through the brand Kayak Fishing Fun. For me, probably the top two sections that I enjoy most annually are looking at all the new hull styles, the number of hulls that are available now for different types of water and specialty fishing, and Thomas, to your point, running the gamut from some of the bigger boats like a PA14 or a Titan to a literal 19-pound 9-foot Hobie inflatable, which is eminently fishable in many waters, and can be launched by literally anybody. That section on all the new boats I find really intriguing every year, and our rigging section, which is really meant to inspire. Rob, to your earlier point about, I can remember cutting into my first $1,000 kayak, like I'm about to put an 8-inch hole in the deck to put it in deck. It's like, oh man, like I think I had to psych myself up for a couple of hours to finally get the jigsaw on it. But once you do it and you become familiar, it's just part of it. So the rigging section, Thomas, for me, in inspiring people over unique and cool things to do. That's one of the things I always find fascinating, and looking at other people's boats whenever I'm at a ramp where there's multiple kayaks, seeing how they've approached a need or a solution that was needed to be invented, and seeing how they've rigged it and applied different products and homemade DIY approaches. I love that part of it. I think that's super cool. And, you can fit one in your garage. You can work on it a couple nights a week and tinker with it all through the season and winter, trying to get it just right. So for me, those are two really compelling parts of the magazine that I find, of the brand really, that I find most fascinating.
Well, and we are gonna wrap this show up talking about some of the videos that we've got in the works and that are being published currently. But a lot of the articles and pieces of content within this Kayak Fishing Fun magazine are complemented by videos, and we're gonna dig into that before we wrap up. But Rob, we put a couple articles in Fisherman magazine that also appeared in Game and Fish, which is a sister publication of Florida Sportsman and In-Fisherman. Talk a little bit about. You only have two to pick from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about those.
The two highlight articles. One was written by Thomas, and it dealt with rigging electronics. It was a primer on how to rig electronics on your kayak, and started with the basics, applications, and went through a lot of the things that take the mystery out of it, from how to run cables, providing foresight about locations, about where to run cables, and mounting systems, and all of the accessories that are available, like the wire grommets and so on, that you can use to really simplify and make a really clean rigging with this stuff. And then it's a great one for anybody that's looking to start out on rigging, or just to continue your education on how to do that. And then the second one, written by Bailey, was about catching fish on the Great Lakes from a kayak. And it showed that, these fisheries, and these great fisheries, whether it be smallmouths or walleyes, they're available to kayak anglers if you do it safely, and if you do it on the right days. You're not out there on the crazy days, but you can reach these areas, and if you know how to fish them, you know how to narrow your spots and use the right methods, you can get in on some of the great fishing that can be had in any kind of boat out there.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to, that was my favorite. One of my favorite pieces is promoting any water.
Right.
Jeff spends a lot of time on the ocean. He spends some time in the Gulf, and he spends some time in between there in Florida. And that's proof that you can really launch on some oftentimes treacherous waters, but if you pick the conditions, you pick your timing, you pay attention to the weather, and as Bailey wrote, you let someone know. And we have a fantastic list of writers, a very strong list of bylines inside this magazine, especially in In-Fisherman and Florida Sportsman, where you have people that have contributed for years, but when you get a collection of kayak minds together and you have an objective to provide the blueprint and a direction and get people involved in the sport, I really can't overemphasize how many different places you can take a kayak, and this magazine literally covers all of it.
Yeah.
So Bailey Eichbrett does a fantastic job, and to your point, you're able to rig your boat to that style of fishing and take it to a big water like that.
Absolutely. Just the opportunities are, so many opportunities to do it. And looking back at the Kayak Fishing Fun SIP, loaded with great content, but I just wanted to mention one article that kind of hit home with me was the article about the new river in Virginia. I spent many years when I was going to school out there fishing the new river. I was on foot most of the time. It's a great fishery to fish on foot from shore, fish those rock ledges, the cascades, and so on. But if kayaks were available back then as an affordable option for a student
you
who
could
was
have done
trying to
so damage. Oh man,
it would have been phenomenal. I mean, you can go up down river. You're not. Sky's the limit. It would have opened a whole new world to learning about that river.
Well, Jeff, talk about that arrow briefly. I know that you wrote it or worked with the writer. That's close to your heart too.
Oh yeah, that's Timmy Dixon. Yeah, he's good people up there. He's got the New River Outdoor Adventures in Virginia, and Rob, he talked about that. Growing up as a kid along that river and kind of just imagining what it would be like to get out there. He'd spend a little time on the skiffs that they used to run up down the river, but once he figured out what he could do with the kayak, it was a breakthrough, and that's a real neat river. Access. And they had a great smallmouth bite there. He got one. I need to find a picture of it, but he got one that was 6.5 pounds, close to 7 pounds on scale, which is a big river smallmouth in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And
I can hear Carney shouting across the countryside if he caught a 7-pounder. Everybody would hear about it.
So yeah, that's a cool fishery.
Yeah. There are so many great places to launch a kayak, and I think that you just got to decide to go. And you got to decide, hey, I'm going to make this investment.
One
I'm going to
and try it if you
get one and do it. That's right. 100% agree with that.
You can get super affordable, entry level, supremely fishable, made in the USA. That new Crescent Primo under $700, like completely fishable, right? A lightweight throw and go. Like you just gotta make the commitment, buy one and do it and get familiar. It just opens up so many options and opportunities for you. One thing, Thomas, I just wanted to spend a minute on because we danced around it as a subject earlier, and it's the accessibility and like your son being able to call his own shots. I find it fascinating the number of ladies and women that we are involved with who are contributors to the magazine. Jeff has some staff members that are hardcore kayak fishermen. I think part of it is to your point, like they get to call their own shots, right? They are the captain. They go out and they can decide, where they're going to go, how long they're going to stay, how much they're going to fish. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about kayak fishermen, like our first cover with Christine Fisher, one of the preeminent kayak tournament anglers, right? Like how many women really enjoy that style of fishing.
Yeah, and of course, Annie Nagels has a story in this issue about what they do in California with crab trapping out there. They'll take their traps out on the kayak and put those out in those cold coastal waters and hauling up those big, great eating crabs.
Well, what a great way to wrap up the magazine there with that feature. I mean, I don't think I had a chance to read that before I got the magazine. When I opened that up, I was like, man, what a, I guess, off the beaten path way to enjoy a kayak.
Yeah.
Well, I think to echo your sentiments there, Mike, it really provides a platform, and my family has had the opportunity to spend some time in the kayaks with me, and we do it together. I know Rob does it together, and listen, this is totally wrong of me. I'm going to go ahead and say this, but my favorite part of this magazine is the cover, and I shouldn't brag, but I'm gonna. My daughter.
This particular issue.
Who's on the cover of this one, Thomas?
The cover of Kayak Fishing Fun, the 4th edition, actually has my daughter on it, and she's tough. She's tough and sensitive in all the right ways. She's very unwilling to be beat by her brother. She fished a tournament with me a week and a half ago. We didn't do very well, but we had a great time. But she is not afraid to put a kayak on the water and just tool around, and she'll have rods on the boat to troll, to cast. That includes bait casters, that includes spinning rods. She is not afraid of any of it. And I think that you hit on the point. I think what makes this such a great sport, what makes it such a great method to enjoy fishing, is that you are your own captain. And despite any education I might have instilled in my daughter, she's on her own, and she enjoys the opportunity to be by herself, to be in control of that boat. She likes the exercise. She does know how to catch a bass from time to time. I've seen her do it, but you know what? The opportunity to get together as a family to enjoy this collectively really is at the heart of what is important to me with kayak fishing. And I have multiple boats that are rigged. Basically, I've got a couple boats that are mine that are rigged over the top, and I'll eat all the jabs that I get for that. But having the opportunity
2 boys
to share
and a Sherpa to launch.
That's right. That's right. It takes a trailer. But the beauty is you can do it your way. I can do it my way.
Yes.
Rob can do it his way, but it's an excuse to get the family together to do their own thing. And I think that supersedes everything we've talked about, is the opportunity to bring people together. We all have a passion for fishing, but when we start talking kayaks, we get excited and we get to share those stories. And I want to wrap up on a story here. It's a story and a half. And Jeff, you were there for the first story, and we're just going to briefly breeze through this, but we almost got shipwrecked on Gilligan's Island with our good friend Ryan Lilly, the brand evangelist at Old Town Kayaks, and we went down to, I'm going to say this wrong, but is it Grand Marquesas? Is that right?
Yeah, the Marquesas Keys. Yeah.
Okay.
Marquesas.
So that's a long ways across some ocean water, and we mothershipped on a yacht. And when I say yacht, this isn't Jeff Bezos's yacht. Okay, this was a much bigger boat than what can fit in my garage, but I mean, you could probably fit it in some garages around here.
85 enclosed bridge, aft cab and Hatteras. Yeah, it was a big one.
But we were field testing then, and we can talk about this openly now. We were field testing the new Old Town EPDL, which is spotlighted in this magazine on numerous occasions. It's an e-bike technology cooked into a pedal drive. And so you have, you can just pedal the boat if you want. It's got a pedal assist at 5 different gears. And then at the very end of that, you can set it up to drive under cruise control, where you push a button and it will drive for you. So really a cool, and I know Carney has some great things to say about this, but it did offer an opportunity for us to get on some unique water and do some fishing. And in the outdoor media, in the outdoor industry, we have an opportunity sometimes to go on media events where we get together with a brand or a couple brands and field test some equipment, generate some content, and just get together, fellowship. It's a great part of what we do. Well, the very first night, and I shared a very small room with Jeff Weakley. It was hot. It was rocking back and forth, and we were sleeping on the bottom level of this yacht, and somewhere up current, a shrimp boat had broken free of their anchor and managed to run into the side of our boat in the middle of the night. And Jeff bolted out of bed, said some things we're not going to say on this podcast, and everybody on the boat was collected up on the main deck as this shrimp boat drifted by. Their crew had fallen asleep. So what's funny about this is we were not able to talk about the kayak following this event because it was still under wraps, NDAs, the whole thing. Well, in that circumstance, somehow the daisy chain of kayaks that were floating behind our yacht, one of them had broken free. And the next morning, Ryan and Alex were considering drafting the resignation letter because one of these kayaks had disappeared, and it wasn't one of the new ones. It wasn't one of the old ones. It was a new Old Town EPDL that was on its way to Cuba. I mean, it was gone. So we called the Coast Guard, and I'm not a math guy. Okay, I don't want to claim that I had this figured out. Okay, but I did sit down with a cup of coffee and think, all right, it looks like the current is moving at XYZ speed out of this direction. I'll bet it's that way generally. And I hopped in one of the EPDLs and turned her on cruise control. And yeah, I had a fishing rod handy to cast some mangroves on the way, but we went on a kayak hunt. We found it. Thank goodness. I did not find it. Jean found it. I think she was in one of our guide boats, Jeff, if that's correct.
Yeah, we were on a big yellowfin center console. We were on one of the mothership boats with Captain Robert R.T. Trossett, and we found that it was miles away from our anchorage.
We never should have found it.
She spotted way out in the distance. She said, "Look at that
Yes.
out there. You know, you just see something floating," and that was it. We recovered it. Had a happy ending.
It was a great story that we're able to share now, but the last story I want to talk about is we had an opportunity to fish the Southwind Plantation, which is in the very southwestern corner of Georgia, and we did a trip this winter. Went to the city of Tallahassee, Florida, which is a very fishy town. I didn't realize the amount of water opportunity that you had right there. And Jeff, I want you to talk a little bit about the various types of fishing we had within, an hour or less. We had some awesome redfish accessibility. We had some largemouth bass accessibility. There were other things there, but if you're looking to get to a region to enjoy various types of fishing, I kind of feel like, Jeff, where you live and where Southwind Plantation is located, that's an excellent destination for the kayak angler.
Yeah, it's neat. It's neat because you've got proximity within a half hour to 1 hour radius of Florida's capital to fish. You could fish deep, reservoirs. You could fish crappie and flooded timber. You can find, spring rivers with crystal clear water that have unusual bass species in there. There's a couple places where you can catch shoal bass not far from there.
Mm-hmm.
The coast is, they call it the Forgotten Coast. It's very remote with endless miles of Spartina marsh. There's red drum. There's speckled trout. It's a real neat place. And then Georgia, Georgia has its own, panorama of fisheries.
It's right there.
Right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we did get the opportunity to spend a day at Southwind Plantation. They had a number of managed bass lakes that were, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to put a bass boat in there. And when we got there, we saw why we were there. There was a perfect, easy launch site, or really the entire shore, where you could put kayaks in. And this is, I think it's largely an upland hunting plantation.
They're world famous for quail hunting. It's one of the premier destinations for quail hunters. They come from all over the world to hunt there, and it's extremely well managed. It's longleaf pine. They've got their own kennels, their own trained dogs. But I think they're sitting on a little bit of a jackpot, a little bit of a gold mine there with that bass fishery. Mm-hmm. And just if they sort of start to cultivate that, and I imagine there's a lot of places around the U.S. that have got some lakes that with a little bit of effort, a little bit of investment, you could create some great fisheries for kayak fishermen.
Well, and that was kind of my point here is there are little pockets of overlooked fishing all across the country, that maybe it's an Iowa farm pond. Maybe they're phosphate pits in Illinois, and Mr. Carney knows what I'm referencing there. There are numbers of places where you can go that may not be very applicable to a big boat. And, sometimes that's the way to go. Like we did in south of Florida there, Jeff, where we had to mothership the kayaks out, but we got to experience that area with kayaks. And I think there's a lot of, I'm going to use the word crick. I know Rob's going to raise his eyebrows here, but an Iowa farm crick would be perfect for a kayak. There are farm ponds and pits, and there are small lakes here in Minnesota. There are tough to access waters in Florida. I think east to west, north to south, we can all probably think of semi-difficult or nearly inaccessible fisheries that a kayak is perfect for. And you can rig it to your heart's content, put it on that water, and you will fish to your dreams. Southwind Plantation was a fine example of that. And Mr. Carney, I hate that we told two stories there that you were not a part of. I'm sad about that. But there is something going on here with Kayak Fishing Fun that is ultimately your baby. And when we part ways here in a minute or two, I want people to be confident in building a kayak, taking on kayak fishing, but most of all, how do they access this information? How do they put the most recent edition of Kayak Fishing Fun in their pockets or on their coffee tables, wherever they're at, and then where do they consume the video content?
Okay, so to pick up a copy of Kayak Fishing Fun from our last 4 efforts, including this spring's version, go to osgnewsstand.com. And you can look through all our SIPs and scroll down to Kayak Fishing Fun towards the middle or bottom part of the page. You can also go to kayakfishingfun.com, our special section on Florida Sportsman's website, and see a literal treasure trove of videos, articles, pro tips, tactics, rigging ideas, everything that you could want to consume relative to all things kayak fishing.
And it's not going to just stop right here now. We're also continuing to develop Kayak Fishing Fun content that you're going to be able to take advantage of in the near future. It is a publication that we're all very proud of. I think that as the kayak fishing community continues to evolve and continues to progress into all parts of the country, you're going to see greater information be presented in this magazine and in the video content that we produce at Florida Sportsman, at In-Fisherman, and anywhere that great publications are sold. And we're happy to have you a part of this. We're proud of this magazine. And this is a funny reality that I think any editor is going to get. Anytime someone says, you know what, I read your magazine all the time in the bathroom, I want to give them a high five for that, because if you're dedicating time in today's digital age and rapidly advancing technological age, if you're committing time to pick up something hard copy and flip through it, that means an awful lot to us. It means an awful lot to Jeff and to Mike and to Rob, because we do put our heart and soul into this publication. We care an awful lot about it. And whether it's on the toilet, on the back porch, or if it's in the office, we're grateful that you're looking at it. And that's a joke, but I'm very, very serious. So thank you for being a part of this. From Mr. Michael Carney, from Jeff Weakley, Dr. Robert Newman, I'm Thomas Allen. This has been In-Fisherman Storyline Hard Copy Edition. We will see you here next time.